From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today is one of the bright lights in the skydiving community. With over 7,000 jumps and 11 years in the sport, Becca Farewell worked as a tandem instructor, AFF instructor, and videographer between Go Jump Oceanside, Skydive Elsinore, Skydive Perris, and most recently, Skydive Utah. Becca has been a positive force in the community as a passionate teacher and a ray of positive energy on the drop zone. In July of 2021, Becca experienced a hard landing, leaving her as a quadriplegic. Despite this life-changing injury, the spirit of Becca has not diminished, as she fervently works through rehab and getting back to living a full life. Since her injury, she has flown in the wind tunnel, made a tandem skydive, participated in tetra skiing, and has taken the stage at comedy clubs as a comedian. Without question, Becca Farewell is a force, and though she doesn't actively skydive anymore, her presence in the community still burns bright because of the effect she had on everyone who got to meet and skydive with her. I'm so pleased to welcome Becca Farewell.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me.
Becca, thanks for being here for the fifth time.
Fifth time's a charm, right?
Fifth time's a charm for our listeners. We've had power outages. We've had Wi-Fi drop-offs.
For the record, not mine. It was not my fault this time.
Not yours. Are you normally a patient person? You've been very patient as we've been trying to get this recording. It's been an hour of back and forth.
I have learned a lot of patience over the last 2.5 years, especially for things that are just out of my control. There's just nothing to be done about it. Might as well have a good attitude about it most of the time.
Sage advice for sure. Well, let's jump in. You grew up in Lake Wales, Florida, which when anyone in our world thinks Lake Wales, they think skydiving, but you just happened to be brought up in Lake Wales, Florida, of all places.
Yes, I am fourth generation Lake Walian.
Wow, Lake Walian.
I don't know. That just came out of my mouth. I don't even know if that's a thing.
So your family are not skydivers. They weren't there because of any kind of skydiving going on. Tell us about your family.
So my great-grandmother moved there, and around the Great Depression, she started a restaurant and country inn, and that's where I grew up, is on that property. My grandfather was a pilot in World War II. He put in a grass runway. I think it was like 5,200 feet runway, short, bumpy, sketchy, with a lake on one end and trees on the other. You know, perfect place to learn to fly and all that. Grew up in aviation. My grandfather was a pilot. My uncle, my 3 cousins, my brother could fly before he could drive. My mom even soloed when she was 16 and decided she didn't like being up there alone. So I grew up in airplanes, but I certainly never would have considered jumping out of one. But I do remember being a kid and standing in our front yard and looking up and seeing crew formations. The Lake Wales Airport is about 4 miles from where I grew up. And I remember my aunt laying down on the ground and singing "It's Raining Men." And I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And I just thought that was hilarious. And even, years and years later, I would be out catching tandems on a windy day, and that song would just pop into my head and I couldn't help it.
Tell me about your family. What did they do?
So my parents have done all kinds of stuff. Kind of the main one is we owned a book business. And so me and my 4 siblings were all homeschooled. And 6 months out of the year, we would be on an RV, traveling the States, selling books at homeschool conventions. Our biggest RV was 40 feet long. It was Charlie Daniels' old tour bus. So we had a 40-foot metal box and a 35-foot trailer filled with 20,000 pounds of books being towed behind. So I like to say I grew up in a 40-foot metal box with 6 other people, and that's why I am the way that I am. We sold that business when I was 13. At the time, I was so stoked because I hated it. I just wanted some semblance of a normal life. But looking back, I'm really grateful for all that it taught me and who it made me today. I think is kind of a unique experience, getting almost all 50 states before you're 13. Kind of unique.
You couldn't pay for education like that.
Yeah, exactly.
How does one get into the book business like that? That's very unique.
My mom just loves books. It started with one little box of books and a local book fair. And she was like, you know what? I could sell these. And my dad was like, well, if you'll finally make some money on books instead of spending money on books, that would be nice. And it started with that, and it grew into a van, into a small RV, into a bigger RV, into a bigger RV, so on and so forth. And they did it for 18 years.
That's remarkable. Who knew you could support a family that big selling books? That's amazing.
They were one of the biggest book companies in the homeschool world for years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like being a homeschool kid?
Oh, that's a good question. What was it like, or what do I wish it had been like?
What did you not enjoy about being homeschooled?
I did not enjoy, well, looking back on, I did not enjoy the lack of structure. My parents are pretty go with the flow kind of people, which is something I very much love about them, but it did not compute well into my education. My education was very loosey-goosey, and a lot of it was just living life and running a business and learning how to communicate with people that were older, wiser, and richer than I was, which I think is invaluable to learn as a kid, but also not finishing high school, not going to school afterwards, and not having that classical education. In some ways I like, but in some ways I wish I'd had more structure just for my own insecurity's sake.
And yet you're like one of the most easygoing or flexible people ever. I mean, I'd say that those traits have served you well by the sounds of it.
I would agree. I'm pretty good at rolling with the punches. I would agree with that.
I will say, for my audience listening that, when we hear of the injury and the severity of it, it's almost like maybe some people would want to tiptoe around, the subject of your injury and what you've been through, but you are not the tiptoeing kind of girl. I mean, we are.
No.
I mean, it's almost, you've hit me with a few jokes. Like we've been through, for our listeners, we have been through multiple takes trying to make this recording happen. And at the last time you said you were going to cross your proverbial fingers or that this would work out.
What's life if you can't laugh at it, right?
That's amazing.
Kind of a toxic trait, I'm not going to lie. My therapist says I should work on it. I said, nah.
That's great. Well, we're going to get more into that. So you grew up in Lake Wales. Were you influenced that you wanted to make a jump because you saw all this crew happening in the skies essentially above your house?
Not at all. I had no desire to jump out of an airplane. I grew up in planes, yes, but I was terrified of heights my whole life. Even just climbing a flight of stairs without the backs on the stairs, I would have a full-blown panic attack. I was never the adventure seeker. I grew up riding horses and four-wheelers because we were out in the country, but I never really pushed the boundaries. I didn't do like jumping or anything like that. A small Cessna drop zone, moved in to right across the yard from where I grew up to that runway that my grandfather built in 2009, I think it was. And it was kind of a one-man operation. The DZO was also the TI, was also the Packer, was also the Manifest, yada, yada, yada. And I was working at my grandparents' restaurant that was right next to it. So I got to know him. And then when his business partner started coming out and jumping as well, I got to know him. And so I would, between waiting tables, run out and watch people land. And I loved to see the level of stoke that everybody had. And I started being really curious about what free fall would be like. I knew I would like that part, but I knew that the door would be horrific, for lack of a better word. So in 2010, we had some friends in town from Louisiana, and they were trying to decide what they were going to do for fun the next day. Were they going to go to the beach? Were they going to go to Disney, et cetera, et cetera? And my mom said, why don't you guys just stay here and go skydiving? And they were stoked about that idea. I happened to walk through the room at that point of the conversation, And at that point, I was 17 years old. And they were like, Becca, come with us. And I was like, okay, where are we going? And they told me we were going skydiving. And I thought, absolutely freaking not. That is not happening. And my sweet mother looked at me. She said, you know what, Becca? I think that would be really good for you. So the next day we did. And it's one of my clearest memories in life. I remember being on the patio with my whole family, signing the waiver, kind of scribbling my age because, gray area. I remember being on the airplane. My uncle was flying the plane. My brother was on the plane with a pilot rig and a camera. And there was one other fun jumper named Justin. When the door opened, all that came out of my mouth was, oh my God, what the hell was I thinking? Justin climbs out on the strut and he looks back at me dead in the eyes and he screams, kicked his legs, and then let go. And I was like, I'm going to die. What am I doing here? This is such a bad idea. And he wrestled me to the door. And my brother and uncle are like shouting support. You got this, you got this. And there's this very poignant moment in that whole experience where we're sitting on the door in the Cessna, and I had both hands gripping the sides of the door. And my instructor, Tim, grabs my wrist to let go of the door and hold my harness. It was so distinct in my memory of this decision moment that I had of really, truly deciding for the first time in my life that fear was not going to own me, that today I was going to make that decision for myself despite of it. Letting go of that door and holding onto my harness. And the second we were out of that plane, I knew life was never going to be the same. After I landed, someone asked me if I ever wanted to do it again. And I was like, absolutely, but probably not ever on my own. And that afternoon, my brother and another one of the pilots, he's this big Australian guy, named Matt Shanley, were sitting down and they were just swapping flying and skydiving stories because my brother had actually done a few levels of AFF a few years before. And I just sat there and soaked it in. I just listened and listened. And after a couple hours of just sitting there, I just looked at them. I was like, guys, I have to do this, don't I? And Matt looked at me. He's like, it's about time you figured that out. And 2 weeks later, they taught me how to pack parachutes. And 2 weeks after that, I did my AFF level 1 on my own pack job. I packed my way through AFF, and the rest is history.
You know what sticks out to me? I think a lot about crossroads moments in life, right? Like how I got into skydiving was the most random, occurrence. It was very passive that ended up changing my life. And it just seems so random that you have friends that come up from Louisiana and they're considering Disney World and maybe going to the beach, and your mom just out of the blue says, you should stay and go skydiving.
Yeah, that's my mom for you.
But where does that, was that even talked about leading into that? Or was that just like out of the blue?
It was just right next door. It's just right next door. So why not?
Why did your mom say, Becca, this would be good for you? Why would it have been good for you?
I think she saw my whole childhood being controlled by fear. I think intuitively she knew that taking control like that would change me for the better in the long run. And I don't think she knew quite what she was signing me up for. But I've asked her since my accident, like, do you regret encouraging me to do that? And she doesn't. She was so supportive the whole process. She's done a tandem with me, which is my all-time favorite jump. She's just been right there for it the whole time.
That's remarkable. If you had not made that jump, what do you think you would have gone on to do?
Oh, God. Maybe an airline stewardess or something, flight attendant. I love to travel. I can't even imagine my life without it. It's been such a huge part of my life for so long. I can't even wrap my head around the idea.
If you're a DZO or DZM listening to this podcast and you're not using Burble, I've got a question. Why not? If the reason is price, what's the cost of your time? Other booking and manifest softwares are a one-size-fits-all. Burble was built from the ground up by a DZO for DZOs to maximize efficiency. Now, isn't that nice? There's no software that compares. Choose Burble. Becca, it seems that you were all in on the sport. I noted that you worked as a packer at Skydive Tampa, Sebastian, certainly Chicagoland Skydiving Center, and on the West
Yeah,
Coast.
there's
And I
been a
know
lot.
probably a few in between.
So I started at Jump Florida Skydiving Center in Lake Wales at my grandparents' property. Then I worked at Skydive Lake Wales, Skydive Sebastian, Skydive Tampa Bay. I've helped out some at Clewiston. I packed for a 4-way team in DeLand. I worked at Start Skydiving at their Florida drop zone in Apopka. I worked at Skydive Delmarva in Delaware, Vermont Skydiving Adventures in Vermont, and then CSC in Chicago. And then I came out west, worked at Go Jump Oceanside, Skydive Elsinore, and Skydive Perris. And then I moved to Utah and worked at Skydive Utah.
So I know a lot of people that move around drop zones, but that's more than most I've ever heard. Why were you moving around so much?
Well, most of them were seasonal. The ones in Florida, I just really didn't want to be in Florida for the long term. So that was more just filling in where I could and getting work where I could. I mean, I was a 17-year-old kid without a car. You just kind of do what you got to do. And then I moved up to Delaware in 2012, I believe it was. And that kind of started the North and South seasonal. Oh, and I worked at Skydive Tennessee in Tennessee as well. And I got my instructor rating, my tandem instructor rating at CSC, and then my AFF ratings in California.
Did you love doing tandems?
I really did. I mean, it beat me up, but there's something so fun about doing the job that the guys do and being good at it and bitching about it less.
Of the tandems that you've done, what's the most memorable?
The one where I got to jump with my mom, for sure. I mean, there's always, I feel like every weekend you get one that you're like, I'll never forget this. But then obviously you do, because you do thousands of them. But I think the jump with my mom was the most afraid I've ever been on a jump. Like the highest stakes I've ever had. And we were releasing my little brother's ashes under canopy as well. So it was a little intimidating on every possible level, like being very emotionally charged. My mom is in her 70s. Don't mess this up, right? I actually had to tell her at like 1,500 feet, I'm like, Mom, it's time for you to stop singing because you keep making me cry. I need to focus because I really can't screw this up in front of all of my coworkers right now.
Wow, that is so cool to take your mom. What a memory that you've shared.
Well, and it was really full circle because of her getting me into jumping. And then I did that one skydive since my accident, and she actually jumped with us as well, which was really special.
Amazing. Becca, if I may ask, it's very rude of me. How old are you?
I'm 31.
31. Okay. So when you reflect on your skydiving career, are there any events? I mean, you were at so many different drop zones. You've met so many people in this sport as a result of working at so many drop zones. When you reflect back on it, is there a time other than jumping with your mom that just lights you up going, wow, that was so special?
I think in like the last year of my jumping career, I was finally starting to focus on my own flying instead of just going out and doing a 2-way no plan jam and goofing off after a day of packing or something. I was doing head up skills camps and learning some VFS and really getting into canopy flying. And it was the first time in all my years of jumping that I'd really focused on what I wanted to do in the sport. And I was started LOing at Paris and getting to free fly a lot more. And I just really cherish those months because like that was completely for me. And it wasn't my job. It was just because I wanted to. So I'm really glad I got to have that opportunity before my career ended.
Yeah. It strikes me that your accident occurred 3 years ago this July.
Yeah.
But I'm amazed actually by how far you are in under 3 years.
Thanks.
In terms of, how you've had to manage it and still move forward with your life, as I said in the intro, with tetra skiing, which we'll talk about later. And you're not like slowing down. You know what I mean? You're still getting after it.
The irony is, as I'm very bad at sitting still.
I can only imagine, for sure.
And I'm very bad at being bored. So yes, I've gotten very lucky with the situation that I'm in and where I live, and all the opportunities available to me out here are pretty one of a kind.
If you don't mind me asking, I know a lot of our audience is aware of your accident, but they don't know what actually happened. Are you willing to share the details of
Sure.
of the day of your accident and what happened there?
Yeah, I can tell you what I know. I have no memories. I remember walking into the hangar, putting my backpack in my locker, and then nothing. That was my fourth jump of the day. It was July 7th, hot as hell. I've heard the density altitude was like 8,500 feet at the ground. So we were zipping in pretty good. And in Utah, it's desert climate as well. So you're going pretty fast anyway. I have really crappy video that some random tandem student in the landing area just happened to be filming. And I have that, but that's it. What it looks like and what I've heard, because nobody actually saw the entire situation unfold, is that the wind switched pretty last second. I bailed from doing my 450 and just did a 90. And I am super current on 90s because I'm an AFF instructor. I worked at Perris and other job zones that don't let you do a big turn if you're doing AFF. So I'm very current on 90s. I'm very comfortable and confident in my 90s. But I bailed on my 450 and I did a 90. I had a canopy fully inflated over my head. It kind of just looks like right at the end, my canopy twitched a little bit. Instead of planing off for my swoop, it just kind of sank about 2 to 5 feet. And I just got dragged across the ground. And I think I would have been fine. But right at the end, you can see kind of a gap in the dust. And I think I landed on my head at the very end. Then I had my camera helmet on. I was doing a video job. And I ripped my head forwards and I broke my neck. I didn't break any other bones in my body, which makes no sense. I wasn't covered in cuts or anything. I had one little tiny laceration on my forehead and a tiny one on my arm. And then I broke both eye sockets, my nose, 2 vertebrae in my neck, and 3 in my lower lumbar. Basically just broke what counted and what mattered. So I got really lucky. There was a young man there. His name was Gabe. He was our video editor, and he's an EMT. His dad's a firefighter. Grew up doing ride-alongs with his dad and all that. He had just got offered a job at the University of Utah Hospital. It was his last week working at the drop zone, if I remember correctly. And he was in the video editing room looking out on the swoop lane and saw the end of my crash and grabbed the medical bag and ran out there along with a few of the other people from the drop zone. And I had my jaw completely locked, could not get an airway for several minutes. I had spinal fluid coming out of my nose. I had been told that my face was basically mush. So with obvious facial fractures, you want to be really careful about trying to get an airway through the nose because you can actually miss and go into brain matter and kill the patient. But after so much time, he realized either he was going to go through my nose and kill me, or he wasn't going to do anything and he would kill me because he could not get an airway out my mouth. So he finally did. And thank God he got an airway. I mean, that kid saved my life. I think he was 22 years old at the time. And he and I have been brainstorming about how to make medical training more of a thing at every job. So the fact that there's not a person there that knows exactly what to do when trauma happens blows my mind. I mean, he's the most medically trained person I've ever seen at a drop zone. And he was our video editor. That wasn't even his job. I just got lucky that he was there that day. Gabe saved my life. Levi started breathing for me. And Brad kept a hand on my pulse to make sure I was still there. Gabe knew exactly the phone number to call to get the right helicopter to get me to the right hospital. That helicopter was already spun up somehow. Made it to me super fast. I think the helicopter might have gotten there before the ambulance. I'm not 100% sure on all those details. But it's pretty miraculous that I'm even here today. My neurosurgeon told me that 99% of the injuries like mine don't even survive long enough to make it to the OR. I feel extremely lucky to have had that team there that day to save me.
You said the word miraculous. Do you believe in God?
Absolutely. And if I didn't believe in miracles before, I sure as hell do now. Because I'm a living one, I think. Yeah. My brother had flown in from Florida with his two daughters the night before. We were basically estranged my whole adult life, and we had reconnected a few months before that. And he flew in the night before, dropped me off at work. He got the call, made it to the hospital before I did, watched my helicopter land. He's an ex-police officer, so they let him into the ER. He was with me the entire time. They let him stay the night with me until the rest of my family was able to get there the next day. Like, there wasn't a second that I was alone through the entire experience.
How soon after when you were admitted to the hospital did you regain consciousness?
So I think I was slightly conscious pretty early. I mean, I have very, very few vague memories from about the first week. My brother told me that he made a comment about how my nurse was hot, and I wiggled my eyebrows at him, and that's when he realized that I was not brain dead, because everyone thought that I would at least have a traumatic brain injury if I even survived the night. But of course, me being me, I'm like, hot nurse, hey. So he was like, okay, that's still my sister. She's still in there. And I actually have a video of him on FaceTime with my sister stroking my forehead, and I'm obviously like covered in blood, and there's like screws in my skull putting traction on my spine, which is pretty gnarly. But he's like stroking my forehead, which makes me crazy. Don't do repetitive stroke. It's annoying. And you can see the video. I just crack my eyes and glare at him like, would you cut it out? And then I just close my eyes again. And that video just kind of makes me laugh, because I'm like, even though it was a disaster at that point, we had no idea what was going to happen, I was just enough with it to hit on a hot nurse and be annoyed at him like stroking my forehead.
I can't imagine what your family was going through when you say didn't even know if you were brain dead.
Yeah. I had not heard exact recountings of the phone calls that they got explaining my situation, but I know that my best friend Devery called my parents, and they called my brother. From what I understand, Devery was like, she's okay, but she's had an accident. But I think at that point, we just had no idea how catastrophic it was. I think Gabe probably was the only one that really knew how bad it was.
So at some point, you are told that you've broken your C3 and C4, and that you're quadriplegic. Yeah,
I don't remember having that conversation. I think it was kind of a slow burn, like it set in over time. Because for so long, it's like, okay, this is really bad, this is really scary, but bad and scary things change. I don't think it was until a couple months later that I realized really the gravity of the situation. Like, I remember little tidbits of like looking down at my arm and seeing my muscles start to atrophy and how hard that was. But I think in the hospital, it's such a surreal bubble of intensity that you don't really get the chance to process it entirely. And especially that first few weeks in the ICU, like, things were pretty intense. Like, my heart kept stopping. I ended up getting a pacemaker because, like, I would literally feel my heart slow down and I'd go unconscious. And I mean, they were pretty quick pauses. I think my longest one was 24 seconds long of no heartbeat, but that's pretty scary. So there were things like that were happening pretty often. That was just like, there was no time to dwell on the prognosis. It was very much like trauma time, focus on surviving the next 20 minutes kind of thing.
Wow, Becca, as I listen to you and I try to have empathy, which I cannot possibly, but there's another track of thought in my head of going, how have you accepted this? Do you think, why me? Here you're the most active person, and then you are forced into inactivity. How have you been able to accept that major contrast in sudden lifestyle?
I'm a professional disassociator. It also just comes in phases and waves. I mean, I find that I do really well with it most of the time, just because I would rather it be me than anyone else that I care about. Because I think that you can handle so much more than you ever give yourself credit for. I've had so many people say, like, man, if I found myself in your situation, I don't think I could have made it like this. Like, I would have found a way to end it all. And I'm like, you just don't know. You don't know what you're capable of withstanding until you have no other options. Like it just is what it is. And you either choose to move forward and find what's next, or you just retreat into yourself and become a miserable person and push the people that you care about away. And that's not good for anybody. I think being here in Utah has given me a lot of opportunities, like the tetra ski and the sailing and all this other stuff that I wouldn't have had anywhere else. So I've always had something to look forward to, which helps me a lot. But it definitely comes in phases. Like I find kind of every April, May, June, I struggle a little bit more because I'm like, skydiving season starting, the world moves on. Like, this sucks. This isn't how my life was supposed to turn out. But I also think that everything does happen for a reason, and I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. And life goes on.
I was trying to figure out if this strength is based in any kind of denial, like, F this, I'm going to move forward no matter what, or if there is like this true acceptance of, all right, this is it. This is the hand that I've been dealt, and I am going to push forward. I'm, because I've not met you, and just going, God, this is very difficult.
It's definitely a little bit of both. And you kind of have to find a piece of grace for yourself to just be patient and be like, today's just a shitty day. I'm mad. I'm sad. And I'm going to allow myself to be mad and sad today. And then tomorrow, I'm going to buck up and do something different.
I sincerely believe you are one of the toughest people I've met. And I'm not saying that because I'm speaking with you. I don't get a sense of any kind of pity, self-pity from you. This is it.
Just the hand I was dealt. And I feel really lucky that I was injured where I was injured and at the time of history that I was injured. I mean, if I had been hurt 10 years ago, I wouldn't be on this phone call with you because I wouldn't be able to control my phone. Like, I can control my entire environment with my voice using Alexa or Siri or any of those things that are just available now and aren't super expensive. Like, I can control the fan, the heater, and the lights all in my room. I can control my entire phone, texts, calls, social medias through my voice. And I feel so lucky with that. And not only that, but like, science is amazing. It's progressing so much. And who knows? I mean, who knows what can happen in the next 2, 10, 20 years. So I think that helps too, just not giving up all hope and saying, well, this is all I get to get. I'll never breathe on my own again. I'll never feel someone hold my hand again. Like, I'm like, no, you just never know.
I mean, I think hope is everything, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
something to grasp onto and hold on to. They're going, okay, that's. So I imagine that there is a large goal of independence or living that you want to get to, but in order to get to the end goal, there's small goals.
Very much so.
What's the next small goal for you?
A small goal / big goal is to get off the ventilator. I've just actually been approved for a surgery for a diaphragmatic pacemaker. So it's basically a TENS unit that connects to the phrenic nerve, which is how your brain communicates with your diaphragm. And it will help, hopefully, reawaken my diaphragm. And then I will be able to wean off of the ventilator. And then once I'm off the ventilator, I am no longer instantly disqualified from clinical trials. So that opens up a whole lot of other opportunities, which is really cool. And other than my paralysis, I am extremely healthy. So I'm kind of a unicorn, if you will, with this kind of injury. That I've met doctors that are running these clinical trials, and they're like, let us know when you're off the vent. We want to work with you. So that's exciting. That's pretty cool.
It's been in the news about having chips transplanted in the brain that will send electrical pulses, to the body to be able to regain. I think if you're not suffering paralysis, you're freaked out because this is Terminator 2 happening. Right.
They've made so many movies about how this is a bad idea.
How do you view that?
I always joke that I would do it in a heartbeat as long as I have a neurosurgeon friend that'll cut it out of me if I become a scary robot. But yeah, I totally do it. I don't really want to be patient zero, but I think it's really exciting what they're doing. I don't really care about using my computer with my brain, but I do know that the end goal is to cure paralysis. And I am so down to be the spokesperson for that. I am so down to be the person that I was like, oh my God, did you see this chick on the news? Like, this could be you. I'd be cool with that.
I'd be cool with that for you too.
Thanks.
Not that you needed my permission.
We're just going to send that into the universe.
If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to personally invite you to become a member of a budding community on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests, chat about things we've already heard, and gain access to some show swag. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. I'd love for you to join me. Okay, on with today's show. Because your attitude is so positive, I imagine a lot of people don't have any idea of what the day-to-day struggle is. You know, for example, when we just came on the call, I think you said your trach had
the
sort of
ventilator
come
started
loose.
popping off my neck, and I was like, oh boy.
I wouldn't say you were gasping for breath, but you were short of breath, obviously, because it's essentially breathing for you. And you know, it was sobering. You were very calm as you texted through voice command on your iPhone for someone in the next room to come over and assist you. But it was very eye-opening to see, this is the realities of this. And yet, you know, you're just cruising along with it. But can you explain what a day looks like for you?
Ooh, you want the nitty-gritty?
Well,
I think that's probably the hardest part of all of this, is being so reliant on other people. I'm a very independent person. I've lived on my own since I was 18, I think. I haven't lived in Florida since I was 19, so I haven't been around my family all that much. I mean, we're very close, but I now live with my parents. Anytime I need an eyebrow scratched, someone else has to do it. I dare you to lay in bed and try not to move for 5 minutes, like not to move a muscle. I dare you to try. It's a lot harder than you think. I get woken up in the morning. Somebody else brushes my teeth, washes my face, brushes my hair. I need help going to the bathroom. I need help taking a shower. I need help getting fed. Usually after all of our morning stuff is done, I like to get into bed and just get off my butt, because my butt gets sore from sitting on it all the time. And I just like to lay on my side and read a book or something for a while, and just have some alone time where I don't feel like I'm bugging anyone to help me with anything, that it's just my time, because I need that. And so do the people taking care of me. They need that too, I think. In the afternoon, I get up, especially if it's summertime, go outside. I try to be outside as much as humanly possible because it makes me less crazy. Yeah, it just kind of depends on the day. Like, I go to PT once a week still. I got to be in the gym, working out, doing what I can do, be pushed, different appointments and stuff. We have caretakers that come in every day to just take the load off my parents in the morning. So they just do all of my stuff with me in the morning so that my parents don't have to. And that's helped a lot. I mean, it's tricky being around somebody that you didn't really choose to be your friend for, 4 hours a day. It gets a little much sometimes. But yeah, I think that's the hardest part, is just being reliant on somebody else all the time and being within earshot of somebody else all the time, because you saw my trach could pop off, which doesn't happen often, but it's a possibility.
Have you noticed when you're able, I don't know, and forgive me if I don't have the right, honest, and I don't know the right terminology, but
really hard to offend me, James.
Yeah, I know that. When you're an able-bodied person, you are going about your life with maybe tunnel vision and don't necessarily have enough empathy for those that are in totally different circumstances than yourself.
Of course not. Why would you ever think about it? There's no need to. I didn't know a thing about spinal cord injuries until I had one.
So now that you're on the other side of that, is there a greater awareness of, obviously there would be, but for example, as you move about life or in the able world, do you find that people either treat you differently or you have a higher awareness of, of people's attention, or, how is it now different?
I think that a lot of people see me in a wheelchair and they're like, wow, like that's a young woman. Why is she in a chair? Why is there a tube in her throat? I think I combat that by being the first one to stare and smile, just because it makes me feel uncomfortable if they're the first one to look away or something like that. I don't know. It's important to me for people to see me as still me in a wheelchair, not as a person in a wheelchair who just happens to used to be this person. I think I combat that mentality by being the first one to speak or the first one to say, hey, how's it going? Or just smile across the room, that kind of thing. Because I think it's very intimidating for anybody to see somebody in a wheelchair like I am. I mean, I drive the chair with my chin. It's weird. Little kids stare at me all the time, and I'd rather them ask me questions rather than be embarrassed of me. There was a mom in Costco last year, and her daughter was probably 3 or 4. And her daughter's like, Mommy, what's that on her chin? And her mom looked at me. She's like, is it okay if we talk to you? And I was like, oh my God, yes. Thank you for normalizing asking questions and treating me like a person.
I have to believe that's so refreshing.
Oh, it was so great.
Yeah, I feel slightly emotional by that because something as simple as normal conversation of, hey, what happened? It's like, I think you don't want to offend. You don't know what someone's been through.
Yeah.
And yet out of that being politeness also is kind of rudeness in a way.
Totally. Well, and it's hard to find that balance because I'm sure there's people out there in chairs like I am that don't want to talk about it, that don't want to relive it. But for me, I'm like, I would rather discuss it and be a person to you rather than you be afraid to look me in the eye.
You got a cool story to say why you were in a wheelchair when people were
that does help. That does help. Yeah.
I was skydiving.
But then it gets into that tricky area where I don't want to scare people away from the sport because it's still something that I love so much. So people are like, oh my God, are you serious? I'm like, let me explain. I was flying a really fast parachute. You would not be, that kind of stuff. Like, I've done it again. You should do it. I'll go with you kind of thing. Like, try to take the edge of fear away from the sport of skydiving. I was just dealt a shitty hand and things happen. If I had been flying a tandem rig, that wouldn't have happened. If I'd been flying Sabre 210, that wouldn't have happened. That kind of thing. It's just luck of the draw, I guess.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Becca Boogie.
Ooh, yay.
Last summer. That was awesome to watch.
It was awesome to be there. It was so overwhelmingly amazing. Like you said before, I've worked at a lot of drop zones. I've met a lot of people, but I don't think I had any idea how many of those people remembered me and gave a crap and wanted to be there just because they wanted to be there. I mean, it was a powerful experience.
For those that are unfamiliar, the Becca Boogie was really the coming together of 3 drop zones: Perris, Skydive Perris, Skydive Go Jump Oceanside, and Elsinore. And it was hosted at Skydive Perris. And there was a bunch of manufacturers that were involved, contributing. And it looked like a few hundred people easy.
I think there was like 200 something people. Yeah.
Yeah, all there for you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy for you to get there. I mean, this is a year ago. You probably weren't as far along as you are now, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was tricky.
And you had to drive from Utah to Paris, and I wasn't there. So how did you feel when you get on the drop zone?
Oh God, I love that place so much. I worked at Paris part-time for 3 or 4 years. So the Perris family's my family, and they've all stayed in touch. I'm still close with all the management. Dan BC has driven up here 2 or 3 times just to come up for a weekend and hang out because, he lived so much of my story, 30 something years ago, and when he had his spinal cord injury in 1992. So there's that plane crash in Paris. He was in a coma for 6 weeks, lost a lot of friends, and he's just been my number one cheerleader through this whole thing. I call him whenever I hit a milestone. I called him as soon as I did my first comedy show. I call him when I get a really good breathing treatment. That kind of thing. The school management still some of our really close friends. And they all helped plan this event with me. And yeah, it was a big deal getting there, but being on the drop zone, like they wanted me to drive all the way around to the front and get dropped off by the pool. And I was like, hell no, I'm going to go to the parking lot so I can drive all the way through and see everybody. I think it took me 2 hours to get from the parking lot to the pool just because it was so fun to see everybody. We had amazing LOs. We had amazing vendors and people that donated stuff for the raffles. We had demos. We had all kinds of cool stuff that day. Skydive Elsinore actually brought a load of their instructors and dropped them at Perris, which obviously never happens. They're competitors. And it was just like the 3 drop zones were so pumped to be working together. It was a really, really special event.
I'm smiling from ear to ear, imagining the ride from that parking lot all the way down to the pool and around the corner. And
I was sunburned by the time I got to the pool. It was great.
I believe it. Gosh, I feel like you must have felt so loved.
Oh, to the nth degree. I don't think I've ever felt so loved by a large group of people in my entire life as that day. And like everyone's wearing Team Becca shirts and wearing sparkly stuff because we could. And it was just like, it was just a magical day. And the DJ was supposed to be there until I think 9:00. And we finally left at 11:30. My dad is out there jamming on the dance floor. I've got a backup camera on my wheelchair. I'm getting lap dances and boob splash in my backup camera. I'm like, guys, my dad's right there. It was like the most epic, good, fun kind of day. It was just really epic. Can't wait to do another one.
Oh, that's so great. It makes me happy just hearing it. Stemming from that, it's then decided you're going to make a tandem.
Yeah, which was not planned at all, actually. I really wanted to go for a plane ride at the Becca Boogie, but by the time it was kind of getting where we were talking about doing it, at that point, the demos were about to start. And I would have missed them. I would have been on the plane with them instead of on the ground watching. And so the boogie was on Sunday, and the 2-year anniversary of my accident was the following Friday. So I was talking to Dan BC, and I was like, Dan, I really want to go for a plane ride on my anniversary. Can we make that happen? And he's like, absolutely. Here's the logistics. I'll put you with a tandem instructor just in case something happens. And I was like, me being me, I was like, well, in that case, maybe I'll just fall out. Whoops. And he's like, damn it, Becca, you stress me out. I'm like, Dan, that's my job in life, is to stress you out. It's just, I take it as a compliment at this point. And so my smart-ass comment just kind of became more and more of a reality. The next day, one of my previous AFF students, Hunter, came up to visit, and he works at the Oceanside Tunnel. And I was kind of brainstorming with him, like, do you think I could do this? Like, I'm being a smartass, but like, what if? What if? Like, it feels almost too perfect to pass up. And he's like, well, why don't you come to the tunnel tomorrow? Come fly with me and see how breathing is, because then it's a more controlled situation. You're not stuck under a canopy if you're having a hard time, and we can just kind of go from there. And I was like, okay. So we drove down to Oceanside the next day, and Dan BC was there. A bunch of my other friends came, and we duct taped me from head to foot, and I still had my old helmet. And we popped me in that tunnel, and after a 2-minute rotation, I came out, and I was just like buzzing. I looked at everyone. I was like, holy crap, you guys. I'm going skydiving on Friday. We're doing this. Like, we literally popped my trach off and put gaffer's tape over the hole. Like, that's how we were just like, we're just going to send it and see what happens. And then in the tunnel, I was like, oh my gosh, breathing's so easy. Like, I've got 120 miles an hour wind helping me out here. Like, this is meant to be. And to be in Paris and to trust the staff so implicitly there, because I worked with them for so long. Like, even right after my injury, people asked me if I would jump again. And if I did, who would I jump with? And I was like, yeah, I'll jump with Lee at Paris. Like, hands down 100%, that's who I jump with. And he was down for it. On Thursday, Dan, BC, and Lee came over and we had like a 3-hour brainstorming session about every possible scenario, how we were going to do it logistically, who's going to sit where in the plane, all that stuff. If I land off, what do we do? What's the plan of action? And because I'm such an experienced skydiver, I was able to look at it from a tandem instructor's perspective, from an LO's perspective, from a quadriplegic's perspective. You know, I was able to really think through every possible scenario. And man, we just felt so right about it. We were so confident. My mom did a tandem on the same plane with me. My dad did a ride along in the plane. He was sitting right next to the door with the school manager, DJ, hanging out with him on the plane. I think we had a 10-way out of the otter for my tandem. It was pretty freaking epic. We popped the tube off, the breathing tube off right as the door opened, and I had another one on the landing area. Like, it was so seamless, just how it all came together. And for it to not have been previously planned, like, I did not go to California with that even on the mind. It just, right place, right time, right people. Everything just fell right into place perfectly.
Wow. Tell you, Dan BC's the real deal.
He's so legit. He's like my favorite person on the planet. Or at least like top 5. Don't get a big head, Dan.
What a great experience. Becca, we've referenced tetra skiing a few times in this interview. What is tetra skiing?
Oh, so it's pretty unique to the program here in Utah. We are trying to grow it into an international sport. But basically what it is a seat that I sit in that has 2 skis strapped onto it. And I control the whole thing myself. So you can either control it with a joystick and using your hand. But because I can't use my hands, I actually have a straw called a sip and puff that goes into my mouth. And I puff on it, it turns right. I sip on it, it goes left. There is a guy tethered to the back of the ski because there is a safety brake. But I am the one controlling the whole thing. And it is a very unique experience because there's nowhere else in the world that has something like this for high-level injuries like me. I asked Dr. Rosenbluth, who's my main medical doctor and also the person who frontlined this whole trails operation with the tetra ski, why he was interested in doing it. And apparently he was a adaptive ski instructor in the 80s and then got his doctorate in spinal cord injuries and realized there was nothing out there for people like me. And he went on a warpath to change it. And now there are, I can't remember how many skis there are in the world, but there are some here in Utah, some in California, Arizona, New Hampshire, Canada. They just went to France and Switzerland. We actually just held the first international tetra ski race last week, actually, and I totally lost, but it's okay-ish. But we had 34 quadriplegic athletes that came from all over the place and got to actually compete. And it was just a really special opportunity that is so new. And the goal is to have it be in the Paralympics someday. The process for that is to get it bigger and bigger, get more skis out there into more countries, have more competitors, have it be a real sport with real rules, and get us into the Olympics. That's the goal.
I watched the video of the competition, and it looked incredible.
It was so amazing. The energy that day was off the charts. It was a really special day.
How fun is it for you? I mean, like going down the slopes.
Yeah, I never skied before my injury. I was a skydiver bum. I followed the summer around, right? And I've been skiing once when I was 7, and I tried snowboarding once when I lived in Illinois, and I was horrible at it. And I grew up in Central Florida, so I don't know what to do with that cold white stuff. It's really cool because it doesn't feel like an adaptive version of something I used to love. It's this whole new sport. It is a completely new thing to learn, and it's not as easy as you would think. It's not just a sled ride. I'm actually driving the thing. I was actually the first person to flip it over by accident, I swear. Yeah, it's just a really fun challenge.
I was going to ask you what makes a fast run. I imagine that there is nuance and technique between the sipping and puffing and how much emphasis you put into that to have various degrees of left and right, which would affect your speed down the mountain. Am I right in that?
Absolutely. The tighter you can cut it into the gates, the faster you go. It is pretty touchy at times. You can go in different modes on the tetra ski, so it can be a faster reaction or not. I found that I do better on medium versus like the fast actuators, just because I'm not super proficient at it quite yet. It gets a little tricky. And for me, I think the biggest challenge for me is because they have to literally duct tape my head to the headrest so that I don't get whipped around everywhere. So I can't see very far. So I can't see like past where I am more than, I would say, 45 degrees, maybe a little bit more. But that's the biggest challenge, is like, you want to plan ahead for your next turn, but I can't see my next turn. So it's a lot of just kind of hoping for the best at this point. But I am getting better, and this was the first time I'd ever skied gates. So it was a fun learning experience.
I imagine it's just a matter of learning the course mentally before you even get there to anticipate and, fine-tuning it. How cool is that?
It's really awesome. And the same program also does, they have a tetra sail. So it's the same setup. There's two straws that go to my mouth. One controls the sail, one controls the motor and the rotor. And we go up to a reservoir about an hour away, and it's just gorgeous. We do an annual camping trip up there that's all adaptive camping. And we go sailing and kneeboarding and wakeboarding, and there's stuff for every level of injury. And they're actually working right now on an off-roading bike for people like me that can use the off-roading bike with the sip and puff. They're working on a couple different options that aren't anywhere else in the world. And it's just, I feel really lucky to be here and a part of it.
Wow, that's amazing. Incredible.
So big shout out to Trails and Jeff Rosenbluth.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help drop zones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. Let's move away from that and let's talk about stand-up comedy.
Sit-down comedy, but yes.
Sit-down comedy. Did you always have that in you, that's something you wanted to do?
Oh, God, no, not a billion years. No, absolutely not. I actually, for my 30th birthday last year, well, I guess the year before, whatever, one of my friends surprised me by hiring a comedian. And I came out to the party and I saw this strange, handsome man that I didn't know. And I was like, who are you? And he's like, I'm the entertainment. I'm like, oh, God, they hired a stripper. My parents weren't supposed to be here. They are here. Oh, no. Turns out he was a comedian. So he did like a 5-minute set, and I was sitting right up front. We were just hanging out in the backyard, and we just start going back and forth at each other. And it was hilarious. And he ended up staying for the rest of my party, made friends with a bunch of my friends, and he ended up coming back a few days later, and he looked me in the eye and he said, Becca, are you ready to be scared about something other than dying again? And I was like, oh, you know my buttons. I just said yes. And he's like, okay, you got 3 weeks. This is the night you're going to do your first open mic night. I'll be there. We're going to work together on your set. Like, let's do this. And I will tell you what, that day of my first comedy set was probably the closest to a mental breakdown I've ever been in my entire life. I've never been so scared. We're like running late. I finally start heading out to the van to go. And I must have been sitting a little bit too upright. and going a little bit too fast and hit a bump or something. But at the very tip top of the ramp going down to the driveway, my entire body flopped forward. My vent popped up in two places. My face was stuck between my knees. I drive my wheelchair with my chin, and I managed to hit it into outdoor fast mode at the very top of the ramp. Smashed into thank God there's a fence on the side of the ramp. And I literally was panicking. And thank God my dad was by the vent and heard me crash. And I just hear, oh shit. Like he runs up from the van. My mom thinks I'm just having a meltdown. She's like trying to put essential oils on me. And I'm like, don't touch me. I just almost died. And the irony is that my whole set was about, it's kind of dark and twisted. How many people have told me that if they were in my situation, they would have killed themselves? And what that makes me think of is how would I do that? Like shrug myself to death, hold my breath, like there's nothing I can do. And then that happened on the way to the club. And I'm like, this is just the irony. It's too good, man. This is ridiculous. Like, this is my life. Of course, this just happened.
I've seen video of you on stage at the comedy club. I don't know if it was if it was the show, the first one, or after.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I know I have a couple up there. They're all pretty old. I haven't done it in a minute. I kind of lost motivation on it this year. I do really enjoy it. It's terrifying. I completely black out when I'm on stage. Like, I'll get down and be like, was that funny? Because I have no idea what just happened in the last 5 minutes. But it's really empowering. You know, people see this big-ass wheelchair getting on the stage and they're like, oh, God, are we allowed to laugh at this? You know, and I look at it as I'm giving the audience permission to laugh at something that society tells us is not allowed to be funny. But quite frankly, it is. Like, yeah, it sucks. Yeah, a lot of it's not fun, but it's freaking funny.
I could see how that'd be so empowering.
It really is.
To literally, you know, break the discomfort in the room. And I'm sure everyone is listening to every word very attentively.
Oh, yes.
More so than most.
Yes. Because I think everyone's just like, oh, God, am I allowed to laugh? Like, we're at a comedy club. She's obviously here for this purpose. But, you know, and then I introduced my ventilator as a character in my act. He has his own personality, and I joke about how I make a good girlfriend because you can shut me up whenever you want by popping the tube off, or end an argument by climbing some stairs, you know, just stupid stuff like that. It's a good time.
So any more comedy in your near future?
Yes, for sure. I will continue doing it. I am actually waiting to hear back as to if I will be doing a comedy set at PIA next year at the after party. We shall see. I am discussing it with another comedian, skydiver friend of mine, Tamale, about potentially doing a whole show for that. We'll see what happens there. It's very beginning stages of discussion. So my hopes aren't too high.
Have you also considered public speaking?
Yeah, I've actually done a little bit. The hospital that I went to, University of Utah Hospital, and the Craig H. Nielsen Rehabilitation Center that I stayed at for almost 3 months, I just love them to death. And they also run trails, which is who I do the adaptive skiing and sailing and everything with. And I've talked to some of their fundraisers and stuff like that. And I very much love to keep doing that kind of stuff with them because I so believe in what they're doing. I mean, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. I wouldn't be thriving like I am if it weren't for them. I talked to the medical director a few weeks ago. I was like, Dr. Dave, I'm going to work for you someday. I don't know how or doing what, but I'm going to be on your staff. He's like, oh, I know. I was like, that's the spirit. Okay.
Becca, you are thriving. Yeah,
it feels
legit.
Like it. It feels like it.
It feels like that on the other side listening to you.
Thanks.
You're rocking it.
Thanks. I think my biggest goal, like soon goal, is to get back in the workforce and just be able to pay my own bills and buy myself and my friends a fancy bottle of wine and hang out. Just become more financially independent again because I really miss that, being a contributing factor in my home and family and life and the world. So I'm actually working with vocational rehab right now, and I have a job coach, and we're working on getting my resume together. And I've got, if anyone wants to send a letter of recommendation, please do. I'll collect as many as I possibly can. But yeah, that's my short-term goal right now.
When people listen to this, I think that they're going to, who maybe didn't know you already, will be inspired. Curious to know who inspires you.
Ooh. Oh, dang, that's a hard one. You should have prepped me for that question.
That's all right. That's a big one.
Yeah, my brain just went, and we shut down now.
Do you have any regrets about getting into skydiving?
God, no. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. I maybe wouldn't show up for work on July 7th every year, but I'd fly the same canopy. I'd make the same decisions of the drop zones that I worked at. I wouldn't have dated so many skydivers, but I'm just kidding. No, I really believe that every decision I've made has made me the person that I am today. And I kind of like that person. So, no, I don't think I'd go back and change it.
So if you wanted to share a message with anyone that is listening, what is something you want people to know?
Appreciate what you have when you have it, especially the little things. Look in the mirror and look at your ass and say, heck yeah, I got that. Because you may not see it again for a minute. Purposefully make friendships that matter, because someday you might need that person to show up, and keep showing up, or vice versa. And isolating yourself in your darkest hour is the worst thing you could possibly do. And just live life to the fullest. Just appreciate every day that you have, doing what you love to do, and even the hard days you can learn something from. I think those are some of the biggest lessons I've learned.
Wow, super wise words there, Becca, for sure. You are an inspiration. I mean, I've only just met you. I was aware of you. I will exit our call just, inspired, because, it's interesting. Some people that go through what you've been through, there's self-pity, and I think it's justified. It's
Absolutely.
a lot to pity,
You're allowed to be sad for yourself.
Yeah.
You need to feel those emotions. You need to be able to process them. Oh, other set of advice, get a good therapist while you can.
I was going to ask you if you've been going through therapy to sort of make sense of all this.
Oh, yes. That, and I think moving back in with my family and being around people all the time, it definitely helps to have someone just work with me on how to work through hard situations and process hard emotions. And I have a tendency of making light of things that are heavy and then just pretending like they don't exist. And she's really helped me kind of process the hard stuff and see it and recognize it. And I think that's really invaluable in my life.
I was going to ask if you make light of things that are heavy to make others comfortable or to make you more comfortable.
Definitely both. Definitely both.
It's interesting, though. I've never heard anyone that works with a therapist, and no matter how good life or how challenging life is, that it doesn't ever add to someone's life in order to have to go through therapy. It's just a great thing.
Yeah, and I think that especially when things are good, to learn coping mechanisms, ways to cope with when things aren't good, and how to appreciate when things are good, because you don't get the highs without the lows. I know for myself, I'm really good at just trucking along and not really looking at the small things. Like, I'm kind of a big picture kind of girl. It just kind of helps me slow down and refocus and see what matters. And she's definitely helped me learn to communicate with my parents, because that's been fun sometimes.
I can't even imagine. Oh my gosh. I mean, I love my parents, and my parents listen to this podcast maybe more religiously than anyone else. Our parents all love us, but
yes,
we're not.
They are the best ever. My parents are amazing, but it doesn't matter how amazing a person is if you're around them 24/7. there will always be something that grates on your nerves. Always. There will always be days where you're like, oh my God, if you could just leave me alone for like 48 to 72 hours, that would be awesome. But the reality is they can't do that. I need them to not do that. So it's a bit of a tricky situation. And luckily we like each other a lot. So it's been really great for the most part.
That works out. You've been out of the sport now for almost 3 years, but I don't feel like you're far away from the sport. Your presence I still feel, which is strange because I've not known you, but sometimes when members of our community get injured and, they tend to sort of fade away, but I don't feel like you have. I'm still very aware of your presence. Do you still pay attention to the industry or the sport, rather?
Oh, yeah. I mean, maybe not as much as I did at first, but like I spoke at Safety Day at the Dropstone this year, and I want to be involved. I think it'd be so fun to teach FJCs, just scare the crap out of the new baby skydivers. But I'm not going to do that because I'm not a terrible person. But yeah, I mean, it was such a big part of my life. Something like that doesn't just go away. I still dream about doing tandems and like, do I still remember my whole process? I dreamt about packing at a boogie a few weeks ago, and I woke up and I was like, wow, I still remember how to pack a parachute, stuff like that. And my skydiving community of friends is just amazing. They show up all the time. I have Tater Tuesday almost every week. We throw a bag of potatoes in the oven and my friends just come over and hang out and eat taters. And it's, past AFF students, old coworkers, new friends of friends of friends. The circle just keeps growing. And I just feel so, so beyond lucky for those people in my life. And yeah, a lot of them are skydivers and base jumpers. And so I still get to talk shop some, which is really fun. I still have students reach out to me and ask me advice. Like, I'm having a hard time with landings. What should I do? That kind of stuff just makes me feel really loved and relevant.
Shows the power of our community. You always hear about it.
It really does.
They're showing up. I have a last curious question. I imagine that you consume a lot of either audiobooks or podcasts. What are you listening to? What gets you, what are you really plugged into right now?
Oh, this is going to be so embarrassing.
Perfect.
I love me some fantasy. The dirtier, the better. I love it. I always try to have a book going that's good for my brain too, though, so I don't just feel like I'm frying my brain cells by just reading disgusting fairy books. I've found that reading books like that are better for escaping the hard days than even TV is, because it's a movie in my head. So I enjoy stuff like that. I don't really like self-help books because cringe, but I've been trying to read things that are, like I just read The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews. That was really excellent about seven lessons in life to be a successful person and to build good relationships and stuff. I just started The Alchemist, which I don't really know what that one's about yet, but it was a recommendation from a friend. But yeah, I usually have a few things going on at once.
Very cool. Well, I'll have to check those books out. Becca, this has been such an awesome conversation. I have so enjoyed it. And
it's been really fun.
And I appreciate you allowing me to ask all kinds of questions and you be just like rolling with it. It's so refreshing, and also gives me insight and empathy of me maybe not feeling intimidated to talk to others that are in a similar situation, because now I know, hey,
they're just people on wheels.
Like everybody else. So awesome. Well, Becca, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing what you get into next.
Thanks so much for having me, James. This has been great.
It's been awesome. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.